Welcome everybody. My name is Struan Campbell. I'm the Outreach Manager at the Inner Temple. I have the dubious pleasure of chairing this panel today. We're going to doing the session for an hour. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers in a moment who've kindly given up their time to talk about their current experiences as BPTC students in a number of providers. I'm also going to give you a brief overview of the different scholarships available at each inn, and we're going to have an opportunity for some brief questions towards the end, and please do think of questions that you can ask, as this is a good opportunity to explore any doubts or concerns that you have. We are also being filmed today, so if you have any concerns about that, if you could please let the person with the camera at the front know, that would be great. This is part of the Bar Council's Pupillage Fair, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to speak to chambers already, and if you haven't, then please do make sure that you go back to Lincoln's Inn at the end of the session. It's my great pleasure, we've got quite a big panel today of volunteers, to welcome Miriam. Miriam is currently studying at City Law School and received a major scholarship. Miriam is also successful in securing pupillage at 6 KBW and has studied history at the University of Leeds and completed her CPE at City University. And then I have the great pleasure of welcoming Rebecca. Rebecca studied classics at the University of Durham and completed her CPE at City, and Rebecca is currently studying the BPTC also at City and received an exhibition award from the Inner Temple. And then down right to the end is Sian, who studied history and politics at the University of Nottingham and completed her CPE from the University of Sussex. Sian is currently studying at BPP London and was awarded a CPE exhibition scholarship, an exhibition award, and an Alfreda Edwards scholarship. And then we have Rosie, who studied classics at Oxford and is currently studying at City University. Rosie also completed a CPE at City and was awarded a Peter Taylor Scholarship and CPE Exhibition Scholarship, and is going on to do pupillage at 24 Old Buildings. And then we have Willie. Do you prefer to be called William? Is currently studying at BPP Birmingham, having graduated from the University of Buckinghamshire in 2014 with an LLB. Willie is a winner of Exhibition Award, Salk Scholarship and Duke of Edinburgh Entrance Award. Now, it is due to me to say that we're all in some way related to the Inner Temple, but this is going to be a very broad introduction to the BPTC, to tips and advice as well, that these are all applicable to each inn. I want to first of all start with just a very brief overview for those of you who don't know, and this might be useful to do a hands up. So who, from the group in front, how many of you are studying LLB at the moment? If you put your hands up. Okay, and how many of you are doing the GDL? Okay, so one. And how many of you are not sure about becoming a barrister or solicitor? We've got some questions. Okay, great. And how many of you are in your first year? Okay, so a couple of you. And second year? And third year. And have I missed anybody out that's doing something interesting? Maybe you're doing a PhD, or what are you doing?
I'm in between doing an undergraduate degree and converting. I'm working.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So hopefully some of this information will be applicable to you. For those of you who are doing the LLB, you'll be on the qualifying law degree, which would enable you to go directly onto the BPTC. If you were doing a non-law degree, then you would do the graduate diploma in law, and the Inns of Court do provide a scholarship for those. If you're studying the GDL part-time, you can apply in your second year, if you haven't applied in your first year, for a GDL scholarship. When you decide to come to the barrister route itself, if you're thinking of doing the BPTC in September 2016, you've already missed the deadline, sadly, for this year's scholarships. They start very early, and the deadline is the first Friday of November for all of the IN scholarships in the year before the BPTC commences. In terms of applying for the inns, you don't need to be a member of one of the inns before you apply for a scholarship, and I'm going to touch on that in a moment. You obviously have to apply through BCAT to apply for the BPTC, similar to UCAS, a centralised process. And you can also apply for a deferred pupillage, as in the case of Miriam and Rosie, who were successful in getting pupillage through the pupillage gateway. And those applications are also something that you should be aware of and are coming up as well. Okay. When you do the bar professional training course, you will do 12 qualifying sessions with your inn. And so once you've joined the inn, you'll do 12 qualifying sessions. These are educational in focus and range from advocacy weekends to conference weekends to lecture nights, and are a broad range of educational focus sessions. And you need those 12 qualifying sessions with your bar professional training course to be called to the bar. And then you would start pupillage. You would do 6 months non-practicing supervised by pupil supervisor, and then 6 months practicing supported by your pupil supervisor. And that together would allow you to do the practicing certificate. It would be issued with a practicing certificate. While you're doing the pupillage, the inns continue to support you through a new practitioners course, an ethics course, and advocacy course as well. So the inns are very much part of the educational focus of your life throughout your time as a barrister. In terms of scholarships, just to say that you don't need to be a member of one of the inns before you apply for a scholarship, but you do need to be a member to receive your scholarship, and you must join by the 31st of May in the year in which your BPTC commences. If you are awarded a scholarship, it's good to join as quickly as possible after that point. The inns have a shared criteria. Each one will use slightly different wording, but they're looking for a strong academic record, so a 2-1 or above is what you should be looking for. A commitment to law, and specifically the bar. So here we're looking for you to have current awareness of some of the challenges in the different practice areas you might be looking at, and it's good for you to keep up your current awareness around changes to the profession and to the bar. We're looking for you to have legal work experience as well as other types of work experience, so for example mini pupillages. Now you don't have to have loads of mini pupillages, but we recommend 3 to 4 looking at different practice areas can be very helpful, both to make your own mind up and also for your CV. And if you are doing a GDL scholarship, then completing a mini pupillage can also help. We want you to think about your transferable skills, so debating, mooting, public speaking or pro bono work would add to that, or any other work that helps demonstrate skills such as presentation, building up relationships, and developing your confidence is very important as well. And when it comes to your application, thinking through what you have achieved as well. So perhaps it would be a good time for you to start a diary, a record of your experience in the different activities that you do, so that when it comes to your application you can note those down and think about the story for each one of those. And then an interest other than law. What makes you a human being? What makes you a rounded individual? What makes you interesting, and how might you use that? Really important. Also, probably very important to your own well-being, to have something outside of a law and to have something outside to help stimulate you. And also it just helps you to connect in interviews and in general conversation. To cover different scholarships, all scholarships at every inn is awarded on merit. Some are then means tested, but you would be awarded a scholarship on merit in the first instance. As you can see, Gray's Inn have a number of set scholarships. The Bedingfield scholarships are set ones. You have the Princess Wales scholarships, again, a set amount. And then you have a general group of named awards. And this can range up to about £15,000 for those. So 40 scholarships from Gray's Inn in total. There is also a residential scholarship. This is where there's an opportunity to be in a flat with 3 other people who are doing the BPTC as well. There are 4 residential awards each year. Lincoln's Inn have got an entrance award, so to cover small fees such as your admissions fee, going to any of the qualifying sessions, and call fees. There are then major awards. These are up to 90 different scholarships, and they range between different amounts, and that will be based around your means as well. Okay, so that's a general group of over £1 million worth of scholarships. They also have very specific ones around accommodation awards, and you can see there are over 14 rooms that are available within Lincoln's Inn, so within the site you are here today. And if you are successful in getting one of those, then your scholarship will be adjusted, and more information about that is available on their website. Middle Temple has a real range of scholarships, but it's easier to summarise that as just over £1 million in total for the BPTC scholarships, and you should look on their website for more details about each different type of named scholarship that they have. But it is in the main case that you apply for the BPT scholarship and then awarded, again based on means and how you perform in the interview, the different types of scholarships. And then at the Inner Temple we have a general entrance award. This is a general amount to cover up to things like admission fees and call fees. We have a number of set scholarships. In total we have 7 set scholarships. These are set amounts ranging from the Peter Taylor scholarship to the Princess Royal scholarship. Then we have a general pot of major and exhibition awards. This totals over £1 million and will be based, again, if you're awarded a major scholarship or exhibition award, you'll be awarded on merit, and then it will be based on your means. So when you're thinking about filling in the financial section of any of the scholarship forms, it's important that you do that and provide as much information as possible. It's not an assessment on you as a person, it's used in a very practical way to set the amount. If you don't fill that in, then you'll be set at the minimum amount for that award. And then there are other BPTC scholarships. All of the inns also provide disability awards, should that be relevant to you, and it's worth investigating that in a little bit more detail. We'll touch on, I'm sure, through the question and answer session, other types of scholarships that are available. And it's to remind you that you can only apply to one inn for a scholarship, and we do share that information as well. So it's, you can only apply to one inn for a scholarship. And then, just as a reminder, that you have to join one of the inns by the 31st of May in the year in which your BPC commences. But of course you can join one of the inns at any point during your law or conversion course. And I would recommend that after today you arrange to go on a tour of the inns, and perhaps if you're travelling down, you can arrange them to be on the same day, so it can be quite workable, and each of them will do their own outreach activities, and you can find more details on their website. So that will stop me from droning on with my Scottish tones and allow me to pass on to much more interesting current BPT students. So I'm going to ask Miriam to start and to talk about her experience.
So I'm going to talk about 3 main things: how to fill out the application form and what I found useful in terms of thinking about the form before the interview, and then preparing for the interview. Struan didn't mention, but in a temple interview everyone that applies. So the application form is a formality, but it's used as the basis for your interview, and preparing for the interview is obviously really important. And then how I found the interviewer's experience for applying for pupillage, because for me that was one of the most valuable elements in terms of preparation for pupillage interviews. So firstly, in terms of the application, as Joan said, you have to fill it in by November. So it's generally the first Friday in November, which, depending on how the year works, can be quite early on in November. So you have to think ahead as to what you're going to include in that application, and things that you may want to apply for before you fill in that application, whether it's mini pupillages, pro bono opportunities, and then get started with those. So you've got adequate time before you fill in the form and submit it to show that you have that commitment to, say, pro bono, through, whatever it may be. You can always add to what you've included on the form when it comes to the interview. So you'll be asked in the interview to talk about what area of law you're interested in, or many pupillages that you've undertaken. And in that, if there are extra things that you've undertaken between November and March or April when the interview takes place, you can include that in your answer to show that you haven't just been sitting idly from November doing nothing. And often that's quite a useful thing to do, because there will naturally be more things that you can do during your third year of your LLB, during a master's programme, the GDL, that really will demonstrate your commitment to the bar and to a particular area of law, given how early November is in the academic year. In terms of looking at the application form, I found it particularly useful to consider all the skills that you need to demonstrate to show a commitment to the bar and to law. So things such as oral and written advocacy, public speaking, building professional relationships, any forms of giving legal advice, self-motivation, drive, initiative, given that you're going to be self-employed at the bar, and a general commitment to the law. And looking at all those skills, and there are undoubtedly more that you can look at, such as commercial awareness and things of that nature, then you can start to draw on the examples that you're going to reference on your application form. So it'll be divided up, depending on which end you apply, they will have slightly different forms, into your legal experience, extracurricular activities, academics, things like that. And then in each area you can look at which skill you're going to reference. You don't want to be too repetitive in the examples you give, and some will be more obvious in the skills that they display than others. But that way, for me, was a particularly useful way to approach the form, to make sure that I covered all the bases of the things that I wanted to demonstrate. And then when it came to the interview, it was really easy for me to go over the form and see, this is where I've displayed this skill, this is how I'm going to answer any skills-based question when it comes to the interview, because you've got all the examples there and it's very clear to reference those in relation to the skills. In terms of preparation for interview, you've obviously got a few months since you prepared the form, so by all means you need to look over the form before you attend the interview, so you're familiar with what it is that you've put down. Circumstances may change, opportunities may have arisen since you've done the form, you may have added to the form, you may have stopped doing certain things that you did on the form, so it's really important to be familiar with that. And then from there, preparing the key questions that inevitably you'll be asked in any interview relating to a scholarship or pupillage. The key questions such as, why do you want to go into law? Why do you want to practice in a particular area? Why do you want to be a barrister? All those types of questions, which can seem a little bit overwhelming given there are so many answers that you can give, and sometimes it's quite difficult to articulate why you want to do a particular thing. So prepare all of those questions, and then also look at things like current affairs, legal developments that have taken place, so that if a question is put to you about, say, a law that you'd like to change, or a legal development that's happened recently that you think is particularly troubling or particularly interesting, or a recent case that you've been following in court, you'll be able to articulate a well thought out answer to that if it's put to you. And I found a few things quite useful doing this. First of all, following some key sites such as Guardian Law that keep up with legal developments on a daily basis, and all kinds of legal developments, not just national ones. Also, the Inner Temple Library have a really useful daily email with all legal developments that happen in that day. If there are any judgments, cases, particular issues of more of a current affairs nature, and they give you the links to that in every daily email. And also just Twitter, following other barristers on Twitter, other legal correspondence for various media outlets. And you can keep a handle on that daily, weekly, monthly, however you feel fit. And also when it comes to interviews, really keeping on top of that all of the time, so you've got a lot of things that you can draw on if you're asked the question. And then when it came to preparing all of those different things, I made myself A4 piece of paper with post-it notes that were different colours depending on what the question was, and listed on each post-it note the answers that I would give to that question. And particularly when it comes to current affairs and legal developments, I found it helpful because you may be asked in an interview to argue for or against a particular position. And I found it was particularly common when it came to pupillage interviews. And so on one side, you can come up with 2 or 3 points as to what you would say in favour of a particular position or a legal development or an argument. And then on the other side, the 3 points that you'd be given against. And often in interviews, you'd be asked to argue for or against the position and then argue the other side of the position. And so it's important you think out both of those rather than just, well, it's fine, I'm for it, I've got nothing else to say. Because you may then come to realise that the arguments are quite difficult for the side that you don't necessarily agree with. And then turning to pupillage application. So I was fortunate to obtain pupillage last year when I was on the GDL, and I found that the scholarship interview process was very useful for me in terms of preparation for what pupillage interview might be like. Every interview is obviously different and formatted differently. The atmosphere of the interview is completely different, but just having that experience of walking into a room with a panel of people that it's quite an overwhelming experience, or it can be. That immediately made me more comfortable with the prospect of a pupillage interview. The types of questions I was asked at a scholarship interview weren't all too dissimilar from a scholarship interview, and just having the confidence of being there and having done it at least once before made me a lot more calm and collected when it came to pupillage applications. And the nature of the form is not too dissimilar as well when it comes to doing pupillage applications. A lot of the things that you'll write will be quite similar, the examples that you're drawing on are quite similar. So it's all, in my experience anyway, part and parcel of one kind of longer exercise in terms of getting to the bar, and the scholarships are definitely a positive addition to any application, but also for me to be able to get to the bar in the first place.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to now go to the other end of the table, and Sian, if you would like to start.
Okay, I'm basically just going to talk to you about a few little colloquialisms that sort of happened in my experience, but I think might be reasonably useful. The first of which goes to sort of getting on a radar when it comes to an inn. One of the reasons why I ended up applying for scholarship at the Inner Temple and eventually becoming a member is because of something called the Pegasus Access Scheme, and I do believe that other inns have something quite similar. It's basically sort of a mini pupillage scheme for people that perhaps are the first in their family to go to university, or are of a ethnic minority or a disability, or any number of state schools. Sort of they have a whole list of criteria, and you sort of fill out a form and pledge for why you think that you're, one, eligible in terms of their criteria, and two, what you think you'd get out of it. And I was fortunate enough to be selected onto that, and I think that one gave me a sort of something to speak about potentially in an interview, which is quite nice. It's like a ready-made topic to write down that is related to the inn that I'm applying to, which is quite nice. So I'd really recommend doing some research into, I don't know all of these, I think Middle does something similar, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. But definitely worth a look to sort of get yourself on their radar and to have an experience, a common experience to talk about, which is quite nice. I think the second thing I would say with regards to actual scholarship interviews is expect the unexpected, in the sense that we've said scrutinise the application form that you've put in, and there's been mention already about be a human being, be more well-rounded, don't just be a law robot. And I'm a bit of a thess, I love acting, I've done a lot of Amdram, and I wrote this, and then I got told, you've got 2 minutes, convince me of the merits of the theatre, go. And it was like, that was the very last. I went in there thinking all things law, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I need to talk to you about, you know, why theatre is so fabulous, and I've already said I love it, so there must be a good reason. So that's always quite difficult. I've heard of other people that have had, I think my friend got asked at Gray's, she was an art history student, who's your favourite artist? And it's just not the kind of thing you automatically expect when you go in for a law interview. So seriously, don't discount anything. All of your little hobbies and quirks and whatever, they really might pick up on, because they certainly did with me. So that's probably a good one. I think the other thing, it's so hard to not be intimidated. As you say, it's a panel of people and it's scary. But I think one thing that I was warned of, and did happen in my experience, is there will always be somebody that has to, on the panel, that plays devil's advocate or has to challenge you, and it's done for a reason. You'll say something and then they'll be like, well, is that really, you know, credible, or do you think that's morally correct? Or somebody will go against you, and the idea behind it really is to try and see how quickly you'll fold. So be respectful, but don't necessarily go, oh yes, you're obviously right, and shut up and don't say anything. Try and defend your position, because they'll respect you more for it in the long run. I think the only other thing I can say, things that have helped me, I mean, we've heard about like mooting and debating. I was really lucky when I did my GDL. Our provider did quite a diverse array of sort of competitions. We had criminal advocacy, we had negotiating, we had client interviewing, all these sorts of things. If they exist at your universities, however busy you are, get involved, because the skills, I did criminal advocacy personally, and it has helped so much with the BPTC, particularly the advocacy class. It's kind of like, no judicial intervention will scare me anymore. I think I've had the absolute worst already, so that's quite nice. And it definitely, it provides a nice stepping stone, I think, between the academia and what you're going to have to do at the practice course, which is really good. So if it's not involved at your particular cohort or whatever, try and get it involved, basically. Try and be a bit proactive and say, why aren't we doing this? Because they do exist out there, these sorts of competitions, and they look really good. They're another nice talking point, and they teach you so much. So very, very big selling point for those. But I think in addition to what's been said, that's probably as much help as I can add in my own personal experience.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. The first is I have a reasonably strange approach to application forms, which I'd like to explain because it does work for some people and doesn't for other people. And secondly, just a little bit more about the interview because I picked Inner Temple for a very specific reason. So firstly, on the application forms then, I tend to answer the question that I want to answer instead of the question that anyone else wants me to answer. What I mean by that is I have a set of key skills and experiences that I personally want to draw on in any application form. So whether that be your personal statement for applying for BPTC to your provider, whether that be the scholarship application form or a pupillage application form, I will use very similar or the same answers for all of those different application forms. So like any question that I'm given on that form, I'm like, oh, you can have answer 3 for that. So that's a slightly different way of approaching it to perhaps some other like ways that people may have, but I find it particularly useful in interviews because I have a checklist of about 5 different skills that I want to get through in any one setting, and I know for a fact that whatever I'm filling in or whatever interview I'm doing, I will get through those because I only have those answers to give no matter which question is asked of me. That said, obviously, as has been mentioned, you will have to be flexible. Make sure that you pick up on every detail of your application form. I was asked, I think, only about things which I hadn't necessarily prepared for. So really go through it, and even those sections at the bottom that you filled in a massive rush, that will be the section that they ask you about. It's always sod's law. That is always what they pick up on. So, and also in terms of application forms, if you know which area you want to go into, so I had a reasonably specific idea of what I wanted to do even before the GDL. I knew that I wanted to go into civil law. If you're missing things, you need to find out what you're missing and get that experience. So before going on to GDL, I have very little kind of pro bono experience, even though I'd done things like mini pupillages. You need to think about ticking off boxes in every area. So you need to have advocacy experience, you need to have legal experience, you need to have pro bono. And unless you have all those boxes ticked, it's going to look like a gap and people are definitely going to pick up on it. So I'd say that's really important. Equally, I got a lot of my experience after I'd set in the application form. So going into the interview, I had all of my London mini pupillages. So previously to that, I only completed mini pupillages in the regions. I wanted to draw attention to that. And also all of my pro bono experience was after I'd sent that form in. So it is really useful to think about, again, what you want to talk about in the interview and to get it out, if at all possible, during the course of the questioning. So I chose to apply for Inner Temple for scholarships because of the formats of their interviews. And I think it's only Inner Temple that will give you something in advance. So what we got was a case. You could pick civil crime or family, depending on which area, again, you want to go into, so it's really important to know. You pick a case, you sit down for 30 minutes, you read it, they ask you to analyse it, and they ask you to go through like some different aspects of the case. It is an advocacy exercise, and that's why I chose Inner Temple, because my strength, and I knew this before going into interview, is advocacy. So the more time I could get telling the panel how great I am at advocacy, the better. That's why I chose it. If your skills lie in a different area, then it may well be worth going to different in, or you're really like worried about getting something 30 minutes before and don't think you're going to be able to deal with that, then equally go for a different in. But as Miriam said earlier, stuff like that is exactly the type of thing you will be getting in pupillage interviews. You will have to prepare something in not very much time and not very far in advance. So I found that experience really, really useful. And also on the current affairs side of the interview, again, is an advocacy exercise. And I keep saying this because literally everything you do in that interview is testing your advocacy. It's not necessarily testing your knowledge, it's testing how well you can speak about things. So I researched it in a very similar way to everyone else. but also I found it really useful to follow certain big stories for a number of weeks in advance so that you know all of the backstories and implications, but also to think about the future impact of the case that you're following. So for example, I chose the Savile case, which was really topical at the time, and I chose it because it has lots of implications in lots of different areas of law. So firstly, it has an issue about trust, and I really like trust law and I wanted to talk about trust law. Secondly, it has an implication in tort and who could be sued for different tortious duties, and it has a further implication in cost law. So I had a million things I could talk about this one case. I didn't just have kind of an overview of what it was about, because necessarily there will be a barrister on that panel who is really familiar with the case. So it's worth getting really in-depth into your current awareness information.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And Rosie, do you want to take us through your experience?
Hello everyone. Sorry, I can't quite shake the feeling that I'm on University Channel, so please bear with me for a second. I want to talk to you all about approximately a year of my experience from when I finished my degree in June 2014. I did classics at Oxford, to February this year when I got pupillage in the early round of applications at a commercial chancery set called 24 Old Buildings. And I just wanted to talk to you about some of the mistakes that I made and things that I want to tell you not to do that I did, so that hopefully I can give you some tips. My first tip would be, in the summer after you finish your LLB or before you start your GDL, not to sit on your backsides and think, oh, well, you know, I've got the summer to wait, I don't have anything to do. The mistake I made was missing a lot of the mini pupillage deadlines for chambers that I liked that started in, say, June and then shut in September, and then after that you couldn't do any more applications until the deadline in February, which was in fact after I wanted to do my early applications, so it wouldn't have been any good for the sort of applications I wanted to make. I definitely advise taking half a day or a day to just mine all of the chambers' websites of chambers that you think you might be interested in, to make a little table maybe of when their deadlines are and how many you think you want to do. People say perhaps do around 5 or 6 mini pupillages in the area of law in which you are particularly interested, so that you can put that on your application form and make a shortlist, and then just do all the applications according to the deadlines, which is very boring, but you'll get really fast at it, because on every application there'll be something like, give us 250 words on why you want to be a commercial chancery barrister, and you'll start just snapping it out really fast. The second thing I wanted to talk about is being on the GDL and applying for pupillage at the same time. I'd say that coming from a non-law degree, going on the GDL was a bit like being dumped in the sea at Christmas. It was really scary. You're suddenly faced with learning 7 areas of law all at the same time, none of which you probably have the least idea about, and thinking, oh God, I've got to do mooting, I've got to do mini pupillages, I've got to do my scholarship applications, and I've got to do my pupillage applications. But I think what I learned is that the busier you are, the more you will get done, and not to let it faze you. Go in with some awareness of what sort of things you're interested in. Tailor what you're doing to the sorts of law you're interested in. If you want to do, say, crime, there's not much point doing the pro bono option that does company wind-ups or whatever it is. Make sure that you're using your time really well. I'd say also you can get by on the GDL or the LLB by just doing the bare minimum and learning what it is that's on the syllabus. But if you're doing pupillage applications in the early round or indeed in the gateway, if you know what kinds of areas of law do it for you, then maybe put a bit of extra work in on those areas of law, so that you have something to talk about in your pupillage applications. If you are doing the earlier round and you have only the GDL or you haven't finished your LLB yet, they're not going to expect you to know all the law in the book, especially not that area in which they practice. They know that. They just want to see your powers of reasoning, of analysis, and how well you deal under pressure, which, I mean, it's difficult for the best of us. I felt incredibly nervous beforehand, but you've just got to stand your ground and try and look as unflappable as you can. It's a bit I suppose it's a bit like with sharks; they can sort of smell fear. So try not to let them have that satisfaction. And I thought that I would just end with an anecdote similar to Sian's, where I did the GDL scholarship application. Went into my interview. This was a few days after I'd finished finals. I was knackered, especially since I came down with glandular fever a week before my finals started, which was frankly not less than ideal. I went into the interview. As I'd not taken these girls' advice, I couldn't really remember what I'd put on my form several months beforehand. And they went, "Miss Fetherstonhaugh, we see from your form that you like ballet. We've got 1 minute to convince a Philistine that it's not completely pointless." And I thought, oh God, I do love ballet. I love to dance ballet. I love to watch it. And I got through about maybe 40 seconds of what I thought were fairly learned points about the aesthetic value of ballet, etc., etc. And then I had 20 seconds left, and I thought, oh, I've got nothing else to say. So I said, well, I suppose if you were a Philistine, you might rather like the fact that there are lots of lovely ladies with their legs on show on stage. And these 3 male barristers just looked at me and went, "Well, Miss Fetherstonhaugh, it's a good thing your minute's up, isn't it?" and they did give me a scholarship. So, you know, you might think that you've totally screwed it up, but as long as you hold your ground and act like you don't want to leave the room and cry, as I did feel like I wanted to do at the time, you'll be fine. And good luck to you all.
Thank you for that insightful, questionable anecdote. And Willie, would you like to end the session?
Yes, thank you. Just going to give you some pointers on what it is like to be a mature student in the bar, and also to reinforce some of the points that my colleagues made. Being a mature student is not a disadvantage to some of you who are mature students. It's actually an advantage because you bring a different flavor, you bring different experiences into the bar, and it helps a lot in interview. And you know, it just shows how diverse the bar has become. And when it comes to scholarships, there's no bar of your age. I mean, I thought, oh, perhaps because I'm a mature student, I'm not going to get it. Maybe a student who's 23, 24, 25 might be in an advantageous position. It didn't work, so I did my preparation, I went for the interview, and I got 3 instead of 1, which cover all of my expenses and a little more. But in terms of your preparation, like my colleagues have said, it is very important that you know you're likely to face some case studies. These are likely to be in the core areas, so criminal, contract, maybe family. So think about those areas, because even though they are not expect you to know too much, if you're able to pick up the key points and you identify the issues, you will be able to put up a good argument, persuasive argument, because all they want to see is that you can argue persuasively. And if you don't know what you're reading and you're not able to identify the issues, it will be perhaps difficult for you to come up with an argument that is persuasively, which again, I'm going to give you an advice on that. I was not able to secure pupillage exactly on that, although I knew the importance of being persuasive. When I went to a pupillage interview, I failed to sell my own self. I failed to sell my application. So it is very important that you be persuasive about what you have written in your application, because if it looks good on paper and you cannot bring it to life at the interview process, it's not going to help you. I had 2 feedback and they were identical the same. We love your application, you are exactly what we're looking for, which you were not able to convince us of what we saw in the application. So word of advice, be persuasive. And if you put something on your application, know what you write. If you put your hobbies, make sure it is your hobby and not something that looks fancy, because they will question you on it. I had 10 questions about my hobby. I put golf, and they asked me, convince me why we should take up the game of golf. And then they went on, you say golf is a game of equal. Why did you say that? And I faced about 10 questions on one issue, golf, when I was prepared to talk about different cases, human rights cases, all kind of cases, the legal aids, cuts, all these different issues I had in my mind. No, my whole interview turned to be about golf. So be warned, it can come from anywhere. So I could know your application back to front. Can't overemphasize that. and it's very important you keep up to date. In addition to The Guardian, there's a good website called lawyer.com. It's free. They have a magazine called Lawyer to Be. They tend to be very good in keeping you up to date with different things happening in the legal profession. So be as up to date as you can. It will help you a lot. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess there are a couple of very general points. One of them, even though I'm not a practicing barrister, for my job interview at the Inn, at least 3 of my questions were about why someone should take up sailing, which is of my particular interest. So there's a running theme here in applications that they will look for things that you think aren't very important. They will go into those. So be prepared. Maybe think about looking through the interview, because it will be a short summary of each section, and thinking about further stories that you can put in as well, and think about that structure in terms of the situation, what you did and what the outcome was. That's a useful way of looking at it. Being strategic, so doing your research, looking at the different types of scholarships available at each Inn, thinking about which ones will put you in the best position, but being strategic also in your studying, thinking about specific areas to study, or if you're doing the GDL, thinking about ones that you might use then in the future, and being practical in terms of realizing you can't do it all. So you need to select things, you need to plan. Rebecca, your example is very good about planning and preparing. Rosie mentioned deadlines. All of these deadlines are quite tight and they're quite close together. So it's very difficult to fit in experience. If you're applying for a BPTC scholarship and the deadline's the first Friday of November, in the year before you even start your BPTC, you're going to do other experience in between that period. So you need to think about how you can do stuff before you even apply as well, okay? And remember, as we mentioned, there's no rush to go to the bar. We're seeing an increasing diverse range of people applying to come to the bar. It is competitive. Over 7,000 people applied for 398 pupillage places last year. Over 1,500 people studying the bar professional training course, and they have up to 5 years in which to get it. Be aware of the fact that the profession is quite small, and that is what makes it very competitive. But also make sure that you've done that research so you can make an informed decision about really why you want to become a barrister, not because you think it's a nice title, but actually why you really want to become a barrister. And once you've got that, then I think you should be able to go for it. Now, can I open the floor to any questions? Yes.
Sorry, I thought, I don't know why I said sorry. Yeah,
That's okay. Don't worry, don't be sorry.
So it's actually, I found it quite surprising that in interviews they ask you about play, being actress, and also ballet, and I'm also acting in my part-time. I love acting. So I want to know what's the psychology behind this. So when the barristers ask you these questions, there must be some kind of mindset or psychology behind that, not only because they want to be unique or special. So what is the mindset behind those questions?
Okay, great, thank you. So what is the mindset behind
or what kind of talent are they looking for?
Asking for very specific questions around hobbies. We'll start with you, and then maybe either Rosie or
I think they were trying to test how persuasive can you be, because if that is your favorite hobby and you are not able to convince me of it, then you are not a persuasive person. They're trying to test how persuasive you can be. That's my opinion.
Anybody want to add from this
I would just say as well, it puts people on a bit of an even playing field as well, because as we were saying, I mean, as GDL students, you could only be halfway through the course by the time you go to the interview. So it would be a little unfair to ask you the intricacies of some piece of law when somebody else who's coming in next might have a PhD in that area. Whereas if we all just talk about something we like to do, then it's even, isn't it, effectively? We're just testing your ability to speak rather than some grandiose knowledge of something that you don't stand a chance really of knowing.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Can I add? Just that I don't think they actually, from my experience, I don't think they really care what they're asking you about. It's actually what you can say, the arguments that you can come up with on the spot, how you say it, the advocacy essentially, not the actual content of what you're saying.
I see. So looking for someone who has the ability to put themselves forward and talk in a very
persuasive manner.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's also worth saying pupillage awards, 80% of the profession is at the self-employed bar, 20% of the employed bar. So for example, the government legal service in financial sectors. In 2009, 3% of the pupils at the Inner Temple were at the employed bar. Now, last year it was 14%. So it's an increasing part of the sector, but my point about the self-employed bar and getting pupillage there is that people are investing their personal money. It's not like a pot of money that pays for new trainees. It is specifically people paying. So they want to be able to see people that they can get on with on a day-to-day basis. I wonder if that comes a little bit into pupillage interviews as well.
I think they really want to see your personality as well. And a lot of, I don't know, like say what Rosie's experience is of pupillage interviews, but in mine they always would focus on something really extraneous on my application form, or something that to me was, because it's something that I'd done, it wasn't that big a deal, but to anyone else who's looking at my form it's slightly bizarre or slightly exciting, and so I would always get a question about that, whereas they tended not to focus on questions about things that everyone has done, because they want to see you against everyone else as much as they want to see you against yourself, and how well you can perform against the criteria that most people that have made it to interview can perform against, to do with like advocacy and legal abilities in terms of like a specifically legal application and the application in that area of law that you're applying for. But a lot of it, I think, is exactly that they want to see you as a person.
The real you.
Yeah, and the
not
fact
with
that
the mask.
Exactly, and the fact that you're going to be working in chambers as a pupil and maybe even as a tenant if they're recruiting with a view to tenancy. They're going to be giving you work, you're going to be going out to clients and to solicitors that instruct that whole set, and they want to make sure that you're a person that they can rely on and take them forward as well as a set.
I found that through every networking event. Every barrister is an interesting person that doesn't talk about their work. So, and there's always going to be someone that's better at something than you. So I'm a musician, I really like playing in orchestras. Every time I go to any set, there will always be someone that's like, oh, I played internationally in like all of these orchestras, I did all these amazing things. But that's what they really care about. They want you to talk with passion about something, and that's necessarily not going to be a really dry area of law. It's what makes you an interesting person that they're going to want to go to the pub with.
Okay, great. Another question. Has anybody got any? Yes.
Yeah, just relating to Rosie's comment about the 5 or 6 many pupillage applications we now have table and grades. Was that the 5 or 6 applications the intended number that you sort of like looked for before applying for pupillage? Or was that the number you narrowed it down from, and then go down from 5 or 6?
Well, I did 7 mini pupillages in all, which is probably a bit more than you need to do. I'd say that the important thing is having 5 or 6 mini pupillages in exactly the area of law for which you are applying. Because even though I ended up at a commercial chancery set, I did about 3 purely commercial mini pupillages, and I remember in interview the commercial chancery sets asking me why it was that I hadn't done all commercial chancery mini pupillages, and one sort of tentatively, or perhaps playing the devil's advocate in questioning my commitment to commercial chancery rather than commercial in general. So I'd say make more than 6 applications, but make sure that you're not just making random ones. Have a strategy about it. Make sure that if you do 2 in family and then you decide you actually want to do criminal, make sure you then get 5 or 6 in criminal, not just sort of 3 there, 1 in another, and definitely make sure that you have a rationale for explaining why it is you chose the ones you did.
To add to Sean's point earlier, so the Inner Temple has a programme called PASS, the Post Access and Support Scheme, to help you secure mini pupillage. If you've studied at UK State Secondary School, is the core criteria of the programme. The Middle Temple also have an access scheme as well to help secure a mini pupillage and marshalling experience. So those are things that you can apply for as an undergraduate or on the GDL that you should look at, or if you're in between either of those. Okay.
Can I just add to what Rosie said? That if you're not sure of what area of law you want to do, when you comes, maybe not necessarily for scholarship applications, because they are perhaps more interested in understanding what your areas of interest are, and if you've done, or you've been interested in one area and now you think you're not so interested, why you're moving to another area. But when it comes to pupillage applications, if you have done a number of mini pupillages in a number of different areas of law, you don't have to put them all on the form. And actually it's advisable probably not to put them all on the form, because if you're applying to, certainly I was advised, if you're applying to a criminal set, they don't really care about anything other than crime. Some barristers will say, actually no we do. Some barristers will say we don't. Everyone's going to give you conflicting advice and you just have to decide what it is that you want to say. But I've been told even by barristers, actually we don't want to see you have too many mini pupillages because it looks like you don't have any other interest outside doing mini pupillages, which frankly most people don't, but you have to do them because you've got to put them on the form. So it's really just about finding that balance. And if, like Rosie said, you are in an interview situation where they challenge you, and I found myself in a couple of times and learned really just to fight that corner, just defend why it is you're showing that you've got a variety within a very small area, and what the reasoning is behind that. Otherwise, it may look as though you don't know what you want to do, even though you yourself do know what you want to do.
But and also, I don't know whether or not that anybody else on the panel feels this, that as you're starting off, going into second year, looking at many people, you still won't be sure about practice areas. So it's okay to look at a couple of practice areas and then be strategic in the application form, particularly if you've then gone on to do more mini pupillage in one particular practice area as well. Because you are finding it out, and it is supposed to be about finding out information, and talking to barristers or talking to panels such as this is the way in which you're going to really get that insight and advice.
Also, I don't think there's a magic number.
No.
Someone that we were on the GDL with knew exactly where she wanted to go. She came from a previous career as a doctor and knew that she wanted to go into clinical negligence work, various things in that area. And she did, even though she knew what she wanted to do, she'd done her 4 or 6 mini pupillages, she did one at almost every set she applied for pupillage at, because she wanted to know, actually, do I like this set? Is it somewhere where I would want to apply? Rather than necessarily, do I want to do this area of law? Because she knew that. And then when she applied for pupillage, she didn't put all 14 that she ended up doing down on the form. She just selected which ones made most sense in terms of that chambers, because every chambers, even that might practice clinical negligence, for example, has slightly different area of practice. They might only do claimant work, only do defence work, and so you can then tailor your application within that. So it's really just what works for you and what you feel you need to do.
That's great. Yes.
I was just going to add on to that. When you're in your first year of tenancy, you're not going to be able to specialise in the area that you think you're going to anyway, are you? So to have a broad spectrum of your mini pupillages might stand you in good stead there.
Yeah.
But also, if you're asked, well, why do you think Chancery, Rosie, then you can say, well, I tried family and I really didn't like that. I wasn't much interested in crime. But at least you've tried them. You've got first-hand experience.
Yeah, I would say that's a really good point, because what I found frustrating when I started the GDL was it was almost the cart before the horses. You were being expected to say, yeah, I've been interested in commercial since I was 6 months old. When I'd just come from a classics degree. I knew I was interested in law because I thought it used the same skills that classics did: analysis, reasoning, words, language. But there's no harm in feeling that you aren't entirely sure which area you're going to go to, and sort of having a little bit of an experiment, because it's just really unrealistic for you to be able to say why you are so interested in the Companies Act when you only found out what it was last week.
Great. And any other questions? Yes.
If you do like a year in between your degree and your BPTC, like if you either defer it or you don't get on place, and similarly like after the BPTC, if you take a year out between BPTC and pupillage, what would you advise that you do on those years?
So the question, if I understand it correctly, is if you defer, or take a year out after doing a degree, what should you do on that year out? Has anybody taken a gap in their studying at all that can help in it?
I haven't, but I know people that did.
Okay. If we can start with you, and then maybe Sean.
So I took a gap, but it wasn't at that point. But I would say that, to be honest, I would treat any summer in between studying in exactly the same way. If you're going to be trying to add to your applications, your CV, according to the skills that you want to show. So when I did a gap year, it wasn't necessarily law that I was considering, but there were interests that were very similar to law. And so I looked to do things that would assist any application in that regard. So if you know that you need to add advocacy skills to your application, or it's something you want to explore to see if, say, the bar is for you, then look at opportunities that will offer you that. Pro bono opportunities will often give you that. If, say, it's after you've done a law degree and before you're going on the BPTC, then that's really what you want to be doing, because you'll need all of those experiences to add to your application when it comes to pupillage. If, say, you've already applied for pupillage and you've had feedback on your form, or you think there are certain areas missing, then it's quite easy for you to identify those. But equally, you don't necessarily have to be doing something in the legal sector to be able to get those skills. You could be working more in a charity environment, or in some kind of commercial environment where you get those skills that are simply transferable to the bar. So my experience anyway, and particularly because I wanted to do crime and there's not so many things that you can do before you go into crime that are applicable other than like being in jail, which wasn't something I was going to do, that you just have to think more broadly about what it is that you want to do and how you're going to get there, and experiences that you might be able to draw on. So I looked at doing things that were working with prisoners, and in like working with solicitors and like those kinds of environments that I could show the skills, but equally I could have gone more broadly and done things that were really not that related to law.
Great, thank you. And of course, having a criminal conviction doesn't exclude you from joining the bar, but you do have to disclose it on your joining application. Do you want to add your
this
point?
isn't my personal, but it's sort of relaying a few friends' experiences. I know a couple that following their degrees have gone on to do both paralegaling and legal researching inside some chambers, sometimes solicitors. One girl in particular, actually, she's on my course currently, and she paralegaled. She sadly didn't get a scholarship, but then her boss basically trumped up and said, I'll give you the money if you come back and work for 18 months, at £1,000 less each month, kind of thing. And so she's going to be working it off when it's done, but she's effectively got an interest-free loan by being in that job from beforehand. I've got another friend who spent a very lovely year in Italy teaching English to children. It's all about transferable skills. So this really improved her sort of communication, interpersonal skills, and she has actually secured pupillage. So I think there is a really diverse array of things that you can do. It's just making it relatable in some way back to the law, and not just doing nothing, I suppose.
And does anyone have any burning question? We'll take this as last two as one go.
I just have a question. I mean, the whole pupillage interview process is very thorough in this first round and second round. Is there how many would be too many to try to fit in, say, for the early application periods in January, February time? Would you say there's an upper limit which you would recommend doing because you could end up with so many on some different days, that sort of thing? Or should you just try to go for as many as possible?
Perfect, thank you. And your question?
Just regarding the pupillage, when you actually secure the pupillage, does it have to be within the area that you actually want to practice in, or sometimes what happens that you're not sure about the area you want to do, even after you've done your BPTC. So could it vary, or is it changeable the area?
Does anyone have any thoughts? Rosie or Miriam, do you have any thoughts about
Well, you did
pupillage?
early round, so
Well, I can try and answer your question about early applications. I applied for. So are you on the LLB or the GDL, or where will you? On the LLM. So you're going to be applying in January. Yes. So I applied for 6 in the early round, and that was quite tough because I was doing it in amidst the GDL. It depends on which chambers they are. So, for example, 24-year-old buildings, which is where I have my pupillage, their last round is a whole day of written and oral tests, whereas some chambers you'll have 2 20-minute interviews and then you'll know after that whether or not you have pupillage. So certainly look into the application processes of the chambers that you're keen on, which should be on the website. I definitely say A, don't scattergun, and B, don't apply for loads just for the sake of doing it. A natural narrowing down would be the chambers that you can actually see yourself ending up at. Just apply to the ones you like. I found that the ones that rejected me were the ones that I didn't want to go to anyway, and obviously that was strange, and I wondered, did they kind of sense that I wasn't actually that keen, or I mean obviously that I just wasn't as good as the other candidates. But yeah, I'd say it's difficult to put a number on it, but definitely don't spread yourself too thin. Sorry, I know that's not really an answer. I'm sorry.
Do you have any?
Yeah, I'd just say I think whenever you're going to be applying, and I think early round was definitely tough because we'd only started the GDL about 3 months before. So you not only had that difficulty of knowing what you wanted to do, but also we're still learning how to manage time and like learn law. But when I applied, I didn't do any in the early rounds because it's only the commercial chancery sets that recruit then. But I really wouldn't underestimate how difficult it is even applying in the summer because we had exams right when interviews were starting, and even the earlier sets I was going from one exam in the morning straight to an interview to have 1 day in between to revise for my next exam, and it really just wasn't fun. And I was lucky in the sense that I got offered pupillage and therefore could withdraw myself from the application before August and could turn down loads of interviews and then collapse and get really ill. But it wasn't something, it was essentially the same as applying for the early window because you're still trying to juggle everything. So you just need to be aware of what the limits of your own capabilities are. If you think you're going to be able to endure the process, apply for as many sets as you can that you are interested in going to, and everything that Rosie said, it makes sense for you to apply to because it is ultimately a numbers game. If you only apply for 3 sets, and inevitably there'll be some rejection somewhere, you're not going to have that many possibilities to interview. Whereas if you apply for the full 12 that you can apply for in the gateway, and then any outside of the gateway, you've automatically got more opportunities for interviews once you take account of any rejections and things like that. So yeah, I wouldn't say fruitlessly apply, but apply for as many places that you want to go and your application would suit as you can do at the time.
And just to come back to the point around, obviously you're applying to the pupillage gateway, and most chambers apply through pupillage gateway, but some are outside of that. And I think that when you're applying directly, because pupillage gateway is more general, you need to just think clearly why you're applying to those sets. So your point about whether or not it was too broad, I think that you can apply for things broadly because you want an opportunity, but I think you need to consider why you're applying to those chambers, because it will come through in your application, and actually being more focused is more powerful to your application. It also gives you more time to focus on them. And in terms of pupillage, also don't reject ones that are a bit outside of the box. So for example, local government, the midwifery council, lots of employed bar providers do offer pupillage, or you can write to them to see if they will offer you a pupillage, because they might not normally advertise. So there are other ways in which you can look for pupillage. It's just worth doing the research, which is exactly the same message around scholarships. There are lots of trusts out there, lots of ways in which you can make small amounts of funding, from the Masonic Lodge right through to specific crime trusts who give out money. So there's a real range. It might be useful to look at postgraduate funding websites, because some of them will go down into very specific pots of money, and you can add, that will all total up at the end of the day to make a big difference. You can also look at loans, but you need to think financially whether or not you want to take on that risk. Or you can look at things like credit union, professional development loans as well. So it's just about doing all of that and making sure that you write it down and very clear on the timelines. We're now slightly overrunning, so I'm going to close the session. Perhaps we could thank all of our panellists for giving up their time today as well.